Hi, I'm Stu Willis.
And I'm Chaz Fisher.
And I'm Mel Killingsworth.
And welcome to Draft Zero, a podcast/video cast where three Aussie, I'm going to call you an Aussie Mel, Aussie filmmakers, we're going to claim you, try to work out what makes great screenplays work.
And the three screenplays we are looking at today are Lost in Translation, The Bling Ring, and The Beguiled. And for those of you who... What do those three things have in common?
You took the words right out of my mouth, Chaz.
Because the quality of comedy in this podcast.
They're really long and about rich people.
Oh, you're not wrong.
Rich, privileged
slightly
women.
racist.
All right, before we alienate everyone, the reason we actually do love Sofia Coppola, who is the writer and director of those three movies, and we love these three films, we do have some things to say about them, and some elements of them have dated, but this is in a way a kind of spiritual follow-up to our Tips from Tarantino episode, where we looked at three films from Tarantino's oeuvre. I totally butchered that. And looked at, we took a film from the beginning of his career, from the middle of his career, and from, I think his most recent or his second most recent film at the time that we recorded, to see what we could learn from him as a writer. And we didn't specifically set out to pick another writer-director. We put it to our Patreons, and this was our first ever Patreon poll from God knows 2, maybe 3 years ago. And our Patreons voted for us to do Sofia over other. We were looking for female screenwriters with a long body of work, and she won. And, we are happy for it. So after having done all the work, I think we've had a little pre-call, and while each film has its own learnings, and we're very much going to be looking at what's on the page, but it feels that even though each film has its own learnings, there is some overall themes that we're going to be looking at throughout all three films. Mine in particular are how Sofia writes performance, when she chooses to cheat as a screenwriter, and finally her use of white space on the page. And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you'll get to see the pages. And for those of you listening, the excerpts will be read out by the wonderful Carissa again. But you can always go to the YouTube or find the scripts in the show notes if you want to have a look at them. But handballing to you, Mel, what were your key learnings before we dive into the films?
I think my key learnings were, it's really interesting to me that all of her screenplays are essentially shooting scripts. If you look at her action lines, some of the actual biggest, most impressive sort of set pieces are really vaguely written on the page, because she clearly knows that she's, as a director, what she's going to do. And another big one is that she tells the reader almost more than she tells the audience about the internal emotional work that the characters are going through. And I find that really interesting.
Yeah. I think this is going to be, like, in terms of the companion pieces, part of the reason we kept pushing this episode is we kept on planning and scheduling other episodes that we thought might inform our read of this, and I don't think we were wrong. We'll probably
most notably the unfilmables, right?
Yeah.
We were like, unfilmable.
It's so unfilmable.
But at the same time, very filmable. I mean, clearly by the fact that she filmed it.
But did she? Some of the emotions in the script, I will argue, actually don't come across.
And whether it even matters or not.
Do rich white people have emotions, Mel? That is the question.
And are they valid? If so.
Well, if they're
this middle-class white person says yes.
Are you middle class, Chaz? You are a lawyer. You're bourgeois at the very least.
Isn't that like the definition of middle class? Isn't that the whole point?
Well, now we're getting into her Marie Antoinette.
Yeah, where Mel and Stu rise up and cut off my head.
Well, there's a sword. Stu's got it right there.
I have carefully art directed. There's an AWG bag, a Draft Zero jumper, and a rapier. It's actually a foil. It's not a good rapier hanging behind me.
So without too much further ado, should we follow the same process we did with Quentin and go career-wise? So start with Lost in Translation, go to the Bling Ring, and then end with the Beguiled?
Remind me, Chaz, what did Quentin say about us on Bettany's Tales?
We were completely wrong.
So hopefully Sophia
now.
Sophia's like, I listened to this podcast out of Australia and they were so wrong. They're not shooting scripts at Mel. Imagine if she called you out. She was like, hey, Melanie, they're not shooting scripts.
I think I said they acted like shooting scripts. I don't think I actually said they were shooting. They're clearly not shooting scripts.
I mean, for the record, we did have various versions of several scripts, and we've read the most recent dated versions we had access to, and they all had locked pages. So they're somewhere in terms of in production drafts.
Okay. Playing the audience surrogate here, I'll be honest, I have done less preparation than Melanie and Chaz on this episode, and forgive me, I've only had 3 years to prepare. But for those in the audience, those of our listeners and the viewing audience, like say Sandra, our top tier patron, that don't know what a shooting script is. What do you mean by, oh, this feels like a shooting script, Melanie? What are the characteristics of a shooting script for you?
So a lot of times a shooting script will have specific cuts, specific angles, specific like sound mixing notes, like when there's a pre-lap that isn't necessarily, and a pre-lap is like when the sound from one scene starts the scene before it. So you'll hear a sound before you actually cut into the scene where the sound is coming from. Things like close up on, or whether something is a fade out or a quick cut to black or a crossfade, things like that. Shooting scripts also sometimes say like there's a close up on this, there's an insert shot of that. And while in these scripts that we were reading, there wasn't necessarily an overwhelming amount of that, which is why I don't think it's a shooting script. There were definitely parts that were heavily annotated with things that only a director would want to know. Like if I, as a screenwriter, were to write a feature film and try to shop it around to production companies with all of these cutting, like close up, dolly in on, like in the first couple of pages, they'd say, get that out of here. So both Sofia Coppola, by nature of her being who she is, even with Lost in Translation, and the fact that she was going to direct these, I think maybe was a little bit looser as she was writing them, just knowing that some of that's more acceptable and that some of it really does add to the tone. Like there are certain scenes where when you smash cut to something, that is the thing that makes it funny. And so to note that in a script is sort of natural. That doesn't make it a shooting script. But there are a lot of those transitional and shot choice things within, particularly I think the Beguiled, if I'm not mistaken, where there's like close up, medium shot, wide shot, that sort of thing. So yeah, I do think that they are veering into shooting script territory.
I mean, obviously part of this is, as we've already said, she's writing for herself as a director. But let's not forget that, as you've already pointed out, Mel, she still has to sell this thing, right? And in particular, the people that Sofia Coppola has to sell to is to get talent, get those actors on board the script. And obviously some of them may just be like, whatever Sofia's doing, I don't even need to read the script, I'm there. But, I think it will be borne out, in what she writes on the page, that how she writes is very attractive to, I think, performers, perhaps even more so than other people, other, producers or what have you. But I mean,
the other, I mean, I know I asked the question and I think that was really useful, Mel. I mean, I think the other thing for me that defines a shooting script, and this is just how I approach a shooting script personally, is that I will tend to pull out the floral literary language of a script that you would use to entice people. And I want a record, like it's literally a description of, and we talked about this on the Unfilmables episodes, like it is more of a description of what we see and what we hear and no reference to tone. Because the implication for me as the director is I have to work out how to create the tone beyond the actions. I want the record of the dramatic action which performance is part of it. And so it's interesting to see how she writes performance, but she isn't using that kind of cute language that we highlighted in the Unfilmables, whether it's the Moonlight script about, that specific line, insert Carissa reading the line here, that specific line from Moonlight, or the one that we always kept on coming back to, which, this is a really great place to have sex. She doesn't really use that kind of language because that can cloud your clarity as a director. In the end, part of what I want as a director as a shooting script is like, I want to know that the drama, if I'm shooting a drama, and as much as her stuff is kind of got a poeticism to it, there is an essence that she wants the drama to be working. That's what it feels like to me, particularly in Lost in Translation, which is the only one of the scripts that I read 3 years later.
I've only had 3 weeks to do all of it, so we understand.
Yeah, but you're a machine. You're typical of a woman versus a man. You're doing all the labor, and I'm just.
That's why you invited me on, right?
Yeah. I've worked it out, right?
So, given that you have read the script, what did you learn from? What are your key things that you would want to pull out of how Sofia has written Lost in Translation?
Should we translate? I was setting up a great transition into Lost in Translation, so maybe we should play the trailer and then talk about it.
Sure thing.
Trailer. That could just be the back matter.
I've been drinking.
I have 1.89 liters of double imperial red IPA. So
get on it.
Oh yeah. All right. So, do we want to read the synopsis?
Sure. Did you have them up, Mel?
This was the Lost in Translation one.
Yeah.
The only one that I
Come on. Oh, yeah. This might actually work.
You want the synopsis from IMDb, I presume?
Yeah, or Wikipedia. I just want to try something.
All right. I've got it whenever. Yep.
Let me see if this works. Oh, yes. This is off my iPad.
Whoa.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Impressive.
So you've got my little... This makes me look like I've done work. So we are talking Lost in Translation. While we're looking at the script, you can read us the synopsis.
Great. A faded movie star and a neglected young woman form an unlikely bond after crossing paths in Tokyo.
All right. And so that is Charlotte, plays by Scarlett Johansson, in probably her career defining, like, the role that kind of really launched her, jettisoned her. Wow. Launched her. Ghost in the Shell was the role that jettisoned her. This is the and this was kind of like the Bill. Oh man, I just went blank on his name.
Bill Murray.
Bill Murray Renaissance film, the Bill Murray-sance. Does that work? So that kind of brought him back into public consciousness, and he was a very clever casting because I think the titular Bob, the character that he plays, is very similar. That he's a comedic actor that was well known for a period of time and has kind of become a parody of himself. And Scarlett Johansson plays Charlotte, and in a way, and this is a question: is this okay? I'm gonna stop screen sharing. I want to roll back a little bit, and I just want to do a little caveat, because it was interesting reading this and then rewatching it, that the rewatch made me feel uncomfortable. That 17 years later, I was like, this film has and I know this will make some listeners roll their eyes, but it has not aged well in terms of the politics, because it's essentially about a guy that's like 60s, kind of having not necessarily a romantic interaction, but an interaction that's certainly not purely platonic, I don't think, with Charlotte, who at the most is 25. So there's an aging appropriate thing. You can see why she went off and did 3 Woody Allen films, because effectively the Bob character is kind of like a more interesting Woody Allen, less neurotic Woody Allen, like kind of type of character. And obviously there's this kind of like, I'm going to be the polite. It is kind of about privileged white people in Japan and them being American tourists and being like, well, why don't people speak English? It's really funny how they speak English, them making no attempt to kind of assimilate into the culture. And so I don't think it's necessarily aged well in that, but it is a beautifully made film, which is why so many of our patrons were keen for us to look at it.
Well, I've got like, oh, sorry.
But that's not screenwriting related. And I still think we can talk about the craft.
There's
but I just
two
want to
screenwriting things related to each of those things, though. The first is that you're noting the you don't think it's romantic, right?
I'm not sure. Like, it is
I
kind
was
of
unsure watching the film, but the script actually makes it explicit.
Yeah.
That was really interesting to me. One of the things I like about the movie is that the movie actually does leave it a bit nebulous, and you could definitely read or argue it either way. Reading the script actually makes it clear that it is romantic. So that was really interesting to me. From Bob's side. From Bob's side, it is clearly he wants to kiss her. It has these like strong romantic feelings, and that like I think that's quite clear.
There is actually one specific line, isn't there, about him wanting to kiss her?
There's at least one, if not two. I believe there's two. Hang on, I've marked it, but it's a bit hard to search within the thing because it's not a PDF. It's an
image.
Oh, you know what what I should have done, Mel? I actually got software on setup, Chaz, that we pay for Draft Zero that specifically we use to OCR the scripts that we get.
Yeah, we should have done that.
Yeah, there's at least one, if not two, explicit references to him wanting to kiss her. Yeah, and it happens the first one happens actually fairly, not early on, but not right near the end either. Like it's pretty romantic, and some of the other overtones, some of just even the things that aren't that explicit make it quite clear that it's not necessarily just a friendship thing. So that's interesting. And per the racism and I found it really interesting that first scene. Go ahead. I'm just going to say this as much for a record as anything else. This isn't quite about the kissing, but there is a line on page 46, scene 75. Let me bring it up. She smiles like she's got a Valentine. So this actually serves. I highlighted this for character motivation because what I was kind of responding to when I was reading this script is how good this is in terms of cast, right? That because of the attention of detail to Bob and Charlotte, not just in terms of giving them moments of performance, but making their motivation really clear, which I actually think is something that in screenwriting I'm becoming increasingly like. You use whatever tools are in your tool belt to explain character motivation, because if whoever, whether it's the audience, whether it's the actor or the director, or ideally both, that understand the motivation, right? You'll find a way to bring that on screen. If you don't articulate the motivation, then you're essentially making people guess.
Yeah.
And I'd rather like this is one, and it relates to also our comment in Unfilmables about the use of like or as if. You know, it doesn't feel like an unfilmable if it's just a like or as if. She smiles as if she's gotten a Valentine. It's an unfilmable because ultimately she's not, but it tells you something about the performance and the motivation. But in the context of this being a romance, then yes, I think this film definitely is. If you cast someone younger than and perhaps better looking than Bill Murray, this could have been a romance. I mean, imagine, I'm trying to think of a George Clooney, you know, would have changed the tone of the film a little bit. And it's interesting they've kind of...
It's hugely romantic. So this is the line that you just read. She smiles like she's gotten a Valentine is from her. The kissing line is actually just 4 pages behind that. So if you go to page 42, page numbered 42. Yeah. So if we look in the bottom of scene 68, he looks at her lying on the bed She opens her eyes to smile at him. He wants to kiss her, but he leaves. Now, so what we're talking about, and we might actually come back to this in the frame of what we expected to find in Sofia Coppola's writing that wasn't there, which, Stu, I think you want to talk about tone. But while we're here talking about these characters and their motivations, I want to talk about the thing that Sofia does incredibly well in this screenplay, and we'll find instances of it in the other ones, is when she chooses to do unfilmables. And God, we go to the unfilmables episode for our whole debate about what is an unfilmable, whether it's allowed or not. But we sort of classified them as to whether what you're writing on the script is shootable, playable, and who's your audience for it. Is your audience the actual end audience of the movie, or is it the reader? Is it the actor, producer, set designer? If it's just for the reader, that was the closest and riskiest form of unfilmable to us. But Sofia's writing here, all of her unfilmables, or ones, I mean, I don't even think that's unfilmable. That's a really playable, like active desire.
Yeah.
But it's indicative when in the script she chooses to push the boundaries of what's shootable is always and solely in relation to character and what their characters want. So going to your point, Stu, anyone reading this script knows with absolute clarity what Bob and Charlotte want and how they're feeling. And because the whole film is this nebulous experience of cultural isolation and a desperate yearning for connection, these kind of beats are sublimely important to make, to attract Scarlett Johansson, to attract Bill Murray into a role like this.
Yeah, she really does push the boundaries in terms of what characters are feeling, like when she chooses to. That's what, like, as an actor, reading a lot of this stuff is very catnippy. As a producer, you're going kind of like, oh, would you be able to bring this across? Oh, what does this mean? Well, the audience get it. I need a voiceover here. But as an actor, you're going, oh yeah, I can bring that across. I can make that visible.
It engages the imagination, right? Which is something that Jazz and I talked about in the Unfilmables episode, which I think is a good rule of thumb. If you get people excited, so sometimes the problem with being too prescriptive is it actually makes people bored. Not bored by the story, but them as directors or actors are not excited about the possibility of bringing it to life. He wants to kiss her, but he leaves, is catnippy because it makes you excited about doing it and it challenges you. They might not even think about how they're going to achieve that moment on the day, right? They might not think about how they achieve that moment until they're there on the day. But then it's a really exciting thing that charges the creativeness in the scene of working with actors, which is, and I'm assuming you're saying I love working with actors for that stuff. How do we do this? And then the cinematography, how do you capture this moment, the rawness of that moment? Where if you're so too descriptive of like he leans in to kiss her, but then backs away, that may make it explicit how you're going to do it dramatically, but it actually may disengage the actor from that idea because it's telling them exactly how to achieve the goal of how to communicate this idea.
Can I bring up one of my favorite scenes and beats where they write it?
You can bring up two, Chaz.
Whoa. Okay. So this is very early on. This is actually almost like the meet cute, except that it's not because they don't meet each other, but they notice each other. Their eyes catch. So they're in the bar. Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
So it's scene 18, top of page 11. And they're in the bar and the jazz band from Sausalito performs. And Bob drinks his scotch, hoping it will all go away. Now, we don't know, like going to your point, Mel, a lot of these beats are very clear on the page and they're not going to be clear to the end viewer of the film. In fact, Sofia's got some stuff in here that I think it's brought out incredible performances from the actors, but it's almost good that it doesn't read as clearly as it does on the page. But then across the bar, Charlotte sits with John, her husband. He is in his late 20s and sloppy in a fashionable way, and some friends, super stylish, weird Japanese fashion people, all smoking. One of them, Charlie, is in a shiny suit, keeps taking pictures and showing them magazine layouts. The jazz singer, thank you, we're glad to be here, we're Sausalito. Charlotte laughs and looks down. The Japanese audience clap very seriously. Ellipsis. She and Bob catch eyes about Sausalito and how weird it is there. Now that eye catch, no one's going to know really that they're catching eyes and sparking over, culture shock, essentially.
But you definitely see them. You definitely notice them catch eyes. That is something that is extremely shootable.
For sure.
There's also one. So there's on page 14. So two things. The first is bumping back to the kiss you thing. On page 73, there's a moment where he wants to tell her he loves her. And I know we're going to get to the ending, but like that makes it explicitly romantic. So I finally thought. But there's on page 14, there's a note where it says that she's like looking through all these magazines, but she's looked at them already before.
Yeah.
And then near the end, Sofia repeats this word for word. And it does two things. First of all, I mean, that's unfilmable, right? The audience doesn't know that she's looked at it before. It doesn't say she's bored, she's disaffected. It doesn't tell her that, it doesn't say like she throws it down in disgust. It's very actor catnippy. But the fact that it's one of the few times that Sofia repeats a line like really explicitly, and it's like 60 pages later, and I marked it and I'm trying to find it because I can't do the like scroll and search thing. So scene 24, page 14 is the first one. And scene 75 on page 46 is the next one. She's already looked at it a few times before. So it's this thing where she's writing this, and in the repetition of it, you're making the reader feel the repetition as well. So it's like, oh yeah, bored, been there, done that, sort of over it. And it's unfilmable, but it's getting the that ennui, that the rich white ennui across through an unfilmable, essentially.
I mean, it's completely filmable. Like, if I noticed that as a director, you'd sit there and go, we're going to shoot this with the same angle. You'd possibly shoot the insert at the same time and maybe change the lighting to match the time of day or the time of night, and that's it. You would actually try to find a way to create that repetition, because that's actually something that is very distinctly filmable, I think, that you can create echoes of them. If you want to do that. I'm not saying, and who knows if she does.
Right.
And maybe in this video we insert like those two shots after this back to back. But you can create that sense of repetition, and she's doing it. She's not calling it out. There is a version of this that is in a shooting script that she could say it is literally the same angle. You could go as far as that in a shooting script.
Yeah, a shooting script would say same angle, scene 24.
Now, so out of all the lines that I've highlighted, I'm just going to scan through the script till we get to that classic end scene. But he's not in the mood. He looks at her like he already hates himself, doesn't need more help. And that's after they were sort of getting closer in their relationship. And then she kind of walks in on him sleeping with the jazz singer. He's kind of ruined the relationship in a way. But they sort of struggle on a bit for the next section of the film because they're trying to pretend that their interest in each other was platonic or was about friendship, and then they sort of rekindle it. But yes, in that classic final.
I know you want to jump forward. That's super exciting. I think what is interesting about this, looking at it, because obviously the subtext is there, and I made the joke, quote unquote joke, that in some ways this film is about a middle-aged man having a crush on a very younger woman. And there is definitely external factors to that. Knowing that Charlotte was 19 when they were shooting this, I mean, there's definitely a bit of a male gaze to it, even though it's a female director. Scarlett was sorry, I call her Charlotte. Look, interesting. It's Scarlett and
Charlie
Charlotte very
yeah,
similarly. Bill and Bob, you know, they're definitely playing with that. But even she talks about she's a recent graduate and she's been married 2 years, so she's what, like, you're the American here. But like, even if she graduated with masters, or what is the equivalent of like a master's in philosophy?
A master's in philosophy?
Can you even do it? I'm assuming she's not a PhD.
She'd be 24 when you graduate with that. 24, 25.
Yeah, so she's been married since 23, which is kind of fucking weird. Anyway.
Excuse me?
Yeah, kind of fucking weird, Jazz.
To be honest, like, a lot of Americans probably marry younger in general anyway.
Yeah, and then, no wonder their divorce rates are so high. Anyway, it's definitely like age inappropriate. But I think what is interesting is I read this script and I think the subtext isn't kind of there. Like, I buy, and I look, revealing perhaps too much to myself, but as like a 40-year-old man, the idea that you'd meet someone who's like that much younger than you, that excites you, you're kind of like, as much as I don't relate to his ennui, because, oh, fuck, it's so sad and tedious shooting a commercial for $2 million for over a fucking week. Like, grow up and put in your fucking big boy's pants on and just do the work, motherfucker. You know, like, him getting excited by being around someone who's an intellectual, you know, who connects with him. And I completely buy the idea that she's kind of wants and she's attracted to the attention. To me, that makes sense. And the underlying motivation of him being attracted to her, right, and then her making him feel younger and exciting, I buy. And it's definitely something that you probably need to put on the page and then pull out in the film. I can actually see that being either a deliberate conscious choice that we're going to make it more obvious in the script so we can pull it out, or they're going to realize in the edit that it is better if it's more ambiguous. Because, you know, as much as I joke it about being like a little bit Woody Allen, the fact is, most of the time in the film, Bob is extremely respectful towards her, right? I don't think he is not extremely respectful. I mean, like, you know, awards for good boys, we set such a low bar, but he doesn't push even if it is an appropriate relationship, he doesn't push the boundaries of that. So even if he wants her to kiss him, even if he wants to kiss her, I don't think he's going to wait until she kisses him. That's my interpretation. And that's probably why the film gets away with it. But in the script, I think they've had to kind of make that more overt, because it's something that you can just do with looks and stuff in the film, that when he looks at her, the way he looks at her, the way he interacts with her, you can go, oh yeah, he's completely excited. He's got a crush on this younger woman, you know, and that's what it is. It's a crush, right?
Yeah. I watched the film fairly recently, and I totally acknowledge, I think the racism is actually a bigger issue in the film than the
we'll come back to that
after gap. But I think less so than in the script. Like, what is actually in the film is two extremely lonely, disaffected people, both of whom have trouble with their relationships, just finding a connection in each other. And I think it always plays, even in the film, that he's more potentially sexually interested than she is. And that's certainly what the script is saying as well. But there's Absolutely. A measure of her playing along with it. Oh, that sounds so terrible. But like engaging with him to maintain the connection that she gets. I mean, the fact that she's disappointed after she catches him with the jazz singer goes to that.
Without getting into a review, Ian, I'll be interested to see what Mel's reaction to this is, because, you know, we're two middle-aged white guys talking about this. You know, I think she enjoys being desired, right? At least in contrast to her husband, because I get no interest that who's he a surrogate for? Is he Spike Jones? There's someone he's meant to be like borderline, a borderline imitation of, like a stand-in for a surrogate. Maybe it is Spike Jones. I can't remember. She wasn't Sofia Coppola. Anyway, I'm going to look this up because we've got time to look this up, and I'm going to look it up because I think it's important.
Well, you know, look.
Gossip is important, guys.
You can borrow plenty of stuff from your own life, but you can also, like, she could be projecting her college boyfriend, which is really what he feels like to me. It also makes sense with the age thing, like college boys who are just like fucking young and dumb. And he's also like, he's clearly flirting with the other musician. He's clearly, you know, like there's a lot
the
of stuff going on
actress.
there. Oh yeah, the actress, yeah. I forget actually what the exact question was that you wanted my feedback on.
Oh, no, the idea that she would be enjoying his attention. It's not even I'm just making sure. It's me seeking confirmation. And like, if you're not going to confirm me, then don't. Not confirm
If
me.
you're gonna disagree, don't bother. I'll just find the Spike Jones anecdote and we can.
It is Spike Jones. It is Spike Jones,
yeah.
right? She was married to Spike Jones. So he's clearly from, like, they married in 1999 and divorced in 2003. In 1999, she was like 29, 28. Anyway.
I mean, anyway, they cast a much younger actress, and that's a casting.
Yeah, that's a casting choice, and that's fine. Like, I think what is interesting about this, I'm ignoring this idea of the personal life and us trying to read into it.
Mm-hmm.
I think her being attracted to being desired makes sense to me, right? And I know this is, yeah. So it's like, yeah, okay, he's sexually interested in me, but he's not being inappropriate, and it makes me feel good about my life. And he's actually like, the sexual interest is only in terms of the film, in looks, etc. As we said, it's a little bit more explicit, and there is a director that could have probably pushed those things a little bit more based on this script, and that is what is interesting. We read the script after all of us seeing the film, but that is a choice of character motivation, that they have chosen to make the character motivation more explicit on the page. And we can only assume whether or not she had the choice to dial it back.
Or whether the actors did.
Or whether the actors did, or whether it was a producer's note, or whether, you know, it could have changed so many times along the path, which is really interesting because we don't know how many, you know, we don't know if there were tweaks and iterations even after they cast and did a table read and you know, discussed it and all that sort of thing.
Are you still screen sharing, Chaz? Did you want to turn them off?
Sorry.
Did you want to?
Certainly. Well, I mean, we've got if we're going to.
So this leads us.
The final scene.
So the final scene, that's a really interesting one that I was like, how are they going to write this? You know, when he whispers in her ears, play scene. It's like, how did they write this? Because there is definitely a question, and then on the it's the kind of question you would see on a screenwriters forum, whether it's /r Reddit or the screenwriters on Facebook or on Twitter, which is like, I got a character speaking to another character and we can't hear it. How do you write that? And the answer is, you write, he whispers in her ear and we can't hear it. Right. There is like the really explicit version, like, don't overthink this. But it was curious, but that has the problem.
And there are actually a couple of places, funnily enough, in this script where that happens. There's two in particular. There's a point where it says he asks her to cut the label off of his shirt, but it doesn't actually give any dialogue, and so there's clearly some like tension, and it doesn't give the dialogue. And then on page, I found one thing I found really interesting was on page 69. There's an alt dialogue line. There's an alt line of dialogue given. The only time in the whole script there's an alt line given, and it doesn't actually change the dialogue. It just takes off. It just takes off the joke on the end. And I was thinking, why did she bother when so clearly a lot of these other lines changed? Why does she bother to write that there's an alt line of dialogue, which is literally an editing snip where you just say, well, let's cut the joke. And then in the end, she writes it out. There's no alt given. There's no alt the audience doesn't hear. There's no alternative of what, you know, maybe he says this, maybe he says that, maybe he says this, and then they decide not to show it. But it's explicitly written out. And then in the film, completely different. So where does that change and why? It's it's fascinating.
Where is it? Page 69, you said?
69, yeah. 69 at the very bottom.
Alt dialogue, alt Charlotte dialogue.
Yeah, but it doesn't actually change anything. But then, so clearly, even when it's a very small tweak, she's giving alt dialogue, which means to me that in the end, she actually expected us to hear what they said to each other, and then decided against it maybe on the day. Maybe she didn't like the dialogue and they decided to play with it. But she clearly, when she had written this script, did not have that famous ending in mind. It's not even altered. Yeah, I want to hear what Chaz has to say about this this famous ending.
Well, you're celebrating 19 years of being married, Chaz, by recording a podcast. So you've got a lot to say about romantic endings, right?
Is this your anniversary today?
No.
Say yes, and then I'll edit out the no part, Chaz.
You'll have to go hunting for one. So yeah, they're in that. Bob is leaving the hotel, like his trip is over. He's going back home, and he's sort of bumped into Charlotte, and they're doing sort of goodbye small talk, and she's got that line that Sophia's got that line reading once again a performance beat. She waits for him to say something more, full stop, and that could have been it, but she goes on. He wants to tell her he loves her, that she should come with him, full stop, followed by Charlotte's line, that's it. And I think that's a fantastic piece of performance writing. Like, it is playable. It won't come across exactly like that, but an actor can see that and like, I know exactly what to do with that line. I am being told everything I need to perform there. And then, so, the car pulls away. He tracks her down, chases her down. They express that they're going to miss each other. He holds her close. And then it cuts to Charlotte watches Bob as he reaches his car. He turns and looks at her. She smiles at him and is lost in the crowd. And there's no whisper in the ear.
Not at all. Not at all. So you kind of wonder, was it a quote unquote cop out? Could she not decide how to end it, and so decides, do this? I can't think of a good ending line. I'll never write anything good ever again. Let's just, or was it supposed to be something that, okay, tell her you love her, like that's the whisper, like make explicit what is within the action lines on the page, or was it something that Murray came up with on the day? Was this something in rehearsals? He's like, well, let me try something. It could be so many things, which is, that's filmmaking, right? Sometimes it's an accident. Sometimes it's for lack of anything better to do. Sometimes it's like you've thought about something for 3 years and you finally hit on the thing. Who knows? There's definitely all of those potential elements.
For sure. And look, I'm not gonna. I don't think it's that she didn't know how to end the film. Like this script clearly knows what it wants to be. The reason why it comes across as a shooting script is she has pared everything back, in fact, to what is shootable. There's very few unfilmables. We've pulled out maybe 10 lines out of this whole script. And given that the film has got such a strong sense of tone and feeling as a movie, when you watch it, it's startling in its absence here that she only chooses to use unfilmables to cheat screenwriting rules. And I hate using that word. I'm just using it as shorthand to tell actors how to perform these beats, to tell readers how to understand how important this connection is between these two people.
Can you stop screen sharing, Chaz?
Yes, I can.
You just monologued over a screen page.
That's okay. I'm not. I don't need my face up on YouTube any more than it already is.
All right. Sorry, I'm just conscious of that stuff.
Yeah.
Easier to add in a page than add in your face. I mean, maybe I'll just stick up a photo and just have like audiogram. All right. So before we get into the fucking racism, let's just be obvious here. I want to highlight a few of those unfilmables that you just talked about, because I think in the end, sometimes it's like these are the broad lessons, but sorry, not in the end. That's not in the end. Like, it's good us talking about in broad gestures, but sometimes in the end, the best thing about reading scripts is that you see things that you can fucking steal.
Mm-hmm.
And I steal so much from other people's scripts on the assumption that most people that are reading my material have never read anyone else's scripts. And so it's taking a line, you're like, that is killer. I'm going to take that and no one's going to know. Right. So let's run through a few of these things so you can also steal with me from Sofia. Right. One of the interesting things that I've noticed here is this little scene in the bottom of 3. POV from car window. We see buildings covered in bright signs, a billboard of Brad Pitt selling jeans, another of Bob in black and white looking distinguished with a bottle of whiskey and Suntory ad. More signs, a huge TV with perky Japanese pop stars singing. Now, I don't think they actually have the Brad Pitt shot in Lost in Translation, but it's important.
2 notes of Brad Pitt in the script, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
She explicitly notes him later as well. In a vending machine, I believe, there's like a Brad Pitt bobblehead that I'll find. Anyway, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's really interesting what you say. You don't see it, but she's used him twice within the script.
Because what it does is elevates Bob to Brad Pitt kind of status. And she, in the end, casting Bill Murray kind of does that. Not that he's a sex symbol, but he's definitely iconic, even though this is like the Murray Assance in terms of filmmaking. He is iconic, but they could have cast anyone. So I think that's an interesting choice because it's like, we're going to make you look like you're up there with Brad Pitt.
And on page 6, it's on page 61, the second note of the Brad Pitt. And it also is interesting because it makes Brad Pitt ubiquitous, which it's making the Bill Murray character as well, right? He's ubiquitous. He's in ads. He's everywhere. So it's comparing him as a sex symbol, but also as this like ubiquitous, super popular, you know, I'm big in Japan, except actually no, for real. And he's everywhere. Yeah.
So very clever. Also, they're not picking someone obscure, right? Like in 2002, 2003, Brad Pitt, I mean, he's still kind of Brad Pitt, but he's really Brad Pitt, right? So that's a good line. And I was interested in this, it's just on page 2, where it's like the concierge and several eager hotel managers greet Bob. He just wants to sleep, but more staff continue to greet him, asking about his flight. They lead him to reception. Notice that there's no dialogue. That kind of sets up a few of the things to do with the racism, which is to do with the context of what they're choosing in terms of dialogue. They've chosen to compress that moment, right? But the reason they've chosen to compress it in the script is on the film, it is also very compressed. So I think it gives you permission for moments where there are characters that come in and greet your character. Just right, they greet them. You don't need to spend a fucking page writing dialogue.
Hi, how are you? I'm well. Yeah. How are you?
Well, Sofia uses this technique a lot more in the Bling Ring, but there's moments between Bob and Charlotte that she writes a whole exchange in big print in the action line. I can't search for it, but it's in they're sitting at a restaurant and it's like they chat about seaweed and how they've got lack of sleep. And before they get into the dialogue. And I wonder if she's like, either I'm going to let the actors play in this area, or I don't care. I'm just going to come into it in the middle of the scene, or I can't be bothered writing the dialogue. Here's the dialogue that actually matters.
Or all of the above. That writing kind of like the top and tail in terms of dialogue is difficult, but sometimes it's really important. And I've had actors, when I've used on Restoration, we actually had the actors improvise their dialogue before basically a character opens the door on them, but we hear muffled dialogue. And the thing is, like in the script, it says you write muffled dialogue, but the actors are like, what the fuck am I actually saying? What are we talking about? So they work something out. They showed me, I just gave them some notes. And the thing is, being able to have moments where you can hear key words is great. And it also makes the actors part of the creative process. You know, I think there's something to be said about that. But again, it's a very shooting script kind of thing, because I would just use, this is getting off topic. I'm going to quickly unshare this so I can, have my rant to full camera. I use square brackets in scripts at the moment for dialogue that is overlapped, where I'm like, this is the end of that idea, but the next character is speaking and overlapping that. And maybe you won't even finish that idea, but sometimes the actor needs to know what that idea is or that beat is so they can perform it, right? And I think that's really useful. And that's the kind of thing where it's like, even though we know we're going to come into that scene on this specific line of dialogue in the restaurant, the actors need to know what the fuck they were talking about before we come in. So they can kind of like, it's where they drop in, to use the kind of like actor terminology. And it also means it's got the advantage is you shoot it and then you've got the audio and you can use it as a pre-lap, right? So I don't think it's necessarily something to be discouraged, as long as it feels like there's confidence in her writing. But, if I was the daughter of, Francis Ford Coppola, I'd probably be pretty confident too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, insecure, but also really confident,
So like us all then.
Yeah, kind of. Let me, a middle-class white Australian male, explain what the female experience to you. So again, there's a lot of the unfilmables more early on. There's one line of dialogue I haven't got many much, Chaz, and we can edit this stuff out. So let me flick through.
Yeah.
We're not doing this live, so
yeah. Why do you think that I'm fussed about this?
I don't know. Because you like Francis Ford Coppola, you're going to judge me? Okay. All right. This is, I think, a bridging moment. I might come back to that one because I think there might be another line of. Okay, here's an interesting one that I really liked in terms of John is the Spike Jonze surrogate, the husband of Charlotte. This is the line. He kisses the side of her face and her shoulder like a cute pet and then continues getting his stuff together. That is an amazing piece of writing that says everything about their relationship. She's a pet, and I just highlighted that because that's an unfilmable, but what's great about it is it relates to the characters' relationships. It's something that you can do in blocking, and it translates in terms of talk about coloring your read of everything. I think that's a great piece of writing. That's why I highlighted it. I'm just showing it, and again, it's using the to get away with it because it's an unfilmable, but it's definitely actable, and it's definitely will inform Charlotte's performance. And your observation, Mel, and I'm just going to quote you so I can take credit for it, is that Sofia tends to write from the experience of the characters, not from the experience of the audience. That's what she's recording. Wait, Chaz is looking at me like it's actually my observation.
He made the observation, or when we were, I think, texting, we were talking about this. Yes. So I just put it in a neat little package. So Chaz did the work. I wrapped the package. Stu runs away with it and takes all the credit. That's all right.
Just call me a director, right? That's what we do. Everyone else does the work, and it's like, well, guys, if I fucked that up, then I'm going to get all the blame. So therefore, I'm justified in taking all the credit.
Now,
high risk, high reward.
As the director, she's obviously she's got a whole lot of benefits as a writer, right? But the fact that she is constantly going to great lengths in this screenplay that she is still going to direct, just in relation to how do these characters feel about each other, and I don't think it's entirely about trying to attract talent or anything like that. It is about
relationships.
She's gone to great lengths to make this script read incredibly well in relation to how the characters, who they are and how they feel about each other. And that kind of unfilmable in this kind of movie is not only playable, it's also essential. So if you are making, it doesn't have to be a Lost in Translation film. If you want to learn how to do great writing of characters, like who they are and how they feel about each other, look for these grace notes in this script.
Because in the end, a lot of films are about relationships, and often the way we understand character is through how they interact with other characters. So having that relationship to understand Charlotte's ennui, and as much as we make the job, look, on a small, fine, whatever, classist,
linguist,
the way we understand characters is through their relationships with other people. There is ways you can shoot Charlotte, and we're about to come to a scene specifically about Charlotte's loneliness. But we need to understand her relationship with John, with her husband, to understand the attraction she feels from Bob and why she spends time with him. Obviously, they have great chemistry, and if we had more time in this podcast, we don't. But we could look at the dialogue, and I swear that my instinct is they use a lot of the hook and eye technique that we used that we talked about in our dialogue episode to build the connection between them. They echoes each other's words. That a lot of that chemistry is, yes, it's the performances, but I think it's the way the dialogue is written that probably creates that chemistry between those characters. It's about relationships. And that's what I love about that pet line, is because it tells you a lot about her relationship with her husband. And then we see the husband's response to the karate actress, right? To understand about like why she's so dissatisfied with this relationship. I mean, my interest is like, why did you ever marry this fucking guy in the first place? Like, did you think he was cool? Is that why you got married? Maybe that's an American thing. You know,
being young and dumb. I mean, look, we do it really well, but it's.
You also do old and dumb really well. Like, just look at your presidency. So, you know.
Oh.
I mean, talking about relationships, I'll just flag one more line, and it's between Bob and Charlotte as their relationship is building, and they're having breakfast, and once again they're watching the jazz singers in the morning, and Charlotte says, trying to make it light, "Hey, look, it's Sausalito, Bob. I see them every morning." And then in the big print it says, "They don't know what to say. Somehow it's too intimate having breakfast. She eats her breakfast aware of her every movement." And it's just a beautiful piece of
I love that
performance. And you can see that and feel that interaction.
And it gives you something as the director and the cinematographer, right? Like as in the, you know, how do you shoot this? How do you act this? How do you direct this? How do you do the sound design for this? How do you do the music for this? Like it actually evokes a whole bunch of, possibilities. It makes you feel like it's a script full of possibilities rather than a prescription for how this film needs to be made. It's very, like, that's what I mean by exciting. It's not that it's thrilling and making my heart bounce. It's exciting because it challenges me creatively to try and achieve it. It's kind of aspirational.
I find it actually really particularly interesting that you bump on the sound design because I know we'll get to that in a little bit, but reading the script for the Bling Ring, I found it really interesting that when you watch it, the sound design is massive and like some of the shots and the things that the DP does are massive, but she hasn't written any of that in. Even though we're getting close to shooting script territory, she really lets that all, she gives you what she wants she gives you what the characters feel and what the characters are thinking, and is sort of letting each or whomever the reader is you will think, how would I get that across using my particular craft? And then those things all sort of combine in the end. So she's not telling the sound designer when, like there's the particular scene where the ringleader is putting on makeup, right? The script doesn't say the sound drops out and you can only hear her heartbeat. The script doesn't say this is in slow-mo and a very slow dolly in and the light is almost strobing. The script doesn't say that, but as the DP or as the sound designer or as whomever, you start thinking, how could I get across the idea that this person is becoming slightly obsessed with themselves, almost like this MDMA moment, right? Where like she's looking in the mirror and she's a little bit, how do you get that across using your craft? So it's interesting because like she avoids being too prescriptive, which can actually hamper, your creativity, even in a shooting script. If you're saying, if you're listing everything that is going to be happening in terms of the look, in terms of the tone, in terms of the lighting, in terms of the effect, you're cutting yourself off at the knees a bit.
Evocative. It's very evocative. So I want to jump into this. I don't know how much, and we can edit this out, how much we want to talk about the racism in Lost in Translation. I think white privilege is like, but I say this as a white person that's not Japanese, and the line that stands out to me is kind of like indicative of the film's kind of attitude to this is page 27, scene 41. Charlotte stands in the back and watches the ceremony. A Roshi speaks in Japanese, monks chant. It's all very foreign. Charlotte tries to feel something. So it's interesting, like I originally highlighted this because of the unfilmable, quote unquote unfilmable, Charlotte tries to feel something. What's interesting is her going around to these places, I don't think is actually it is about the alienation, because on one level, this is trying to use the idea of being in a foreign country as a emotional metaphor for feeling alienated. And I have spent a tiny bit of time in Japan, and you definitely stand out as a white person. You're like, oh, I get what it feels like to be not the color of everyone else. The same here. Everyone's looking at me. I feel really uncomfortable. I don't understand, right? But in this case, they're taking it, and Charlotte's very different to Bob. Bob kind of seems to be annoyed at everyone not meeting him at his level, right?
I
think, but is this worth talking about, or should we kind of like jettison it like Charlotte after Ghost in the Shell?
Actually, I'm not sure that this scene in particular is very demonstrative of the racism that I would find in the script and this or the movie. And I do think those are two different discussions, because that is an experience that a Japanese person who grew up in America could, like, who was born and raised, like the diaspora. One of the interesting things, for example, about The Farewell, right, is and Lula Wang's talked about this, is in terms of like, it's that idea of disconnectedness, of not understanding the rituals and social mores of a place that you didn't grow up. For me, this scene is about that and less about the race. However,
absolutely,
because it's within a script that has other racial issues, and then it builds on that. But then you gotta, if we're gonna go into it, for me, it's really interesting, the racism of the script versus the racism of the film, and how does it's like, because some of these scenes don't read as racist of the filmmaker, right? They read as saying, here's some people doing some racist behaviors. Is that a bad thing to portray? Lots of white people go over to Japan and are racist. Depicting that is not wrong. The biggest thing I bump on is that the very first scene that we get some of that, where the escort comes in and is telling him to do things. She's playing the writing for laughs. The writing of her saying,
yeah, I've got it. I'm going to bring it up.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the page.
Page 7. It's Lip My Stockings.
Lip my stockings, lip my stockings. As a reader, you don't understand what's going on. And then when you realize what it is, it's funny. And she's really playing that. And that's what sets the tone for the rest of the interactions. It's the first thing. It's the way it's written. It's the fact that it's written with that letter. And then, showing, the Spike Jonze surrogate, John, the husband, as saying dismissively, oh, they say things funny. That's fine, because that's depicting the character's races. Writing it in the way that it's written, and writing in some of the, there's another sentence I found about how, like, the Japanese the businessmen, I think, when they're sort of nattering on about the commercial, there's like an offhanded comment that's an action line that is talking about how they're over enunciating, and it's sort of making fun of that, quote unquote, what white people would sort of mock as the accent. And so that's the problem. And how does that translate into the film? That's a whole other issue. So I think I just think that it's maybe, now that I've discussed it, I just think that it's maybe a discussion that is a much, much bigger discussion. I'm happy
absolutely.
to bump on it, though. But
I feel like we need to acknowledge it.
Yeah,
sorry, and I acknowledge that as like three white people looking at this. But it was interesting that, like, after conversations that, friends of the podcast, Corey and Michelle, friends of mine, not just of the podcast, it's like, you look at this and you're like, wow, they're making us laugh at the fact that with Bob, at he being in Tokyo, that these people can't speak English properly. And it's like, dude, you're not even fucking attempting to speak Japanese, right? But we're with him. The film aligns us with him. And I think in the script, I didn't notice in the script, because I was like, yeah, okay, there's definitely a lost in translation aspect to it, right? But the script, there was a neutrality to it. But with the exception of that scene, which I think is important, even him being directed and stuff, it's like him being like, yeah, I think he said more than that, all that scene with like, it's funny, but it's not like funny as in like it's like I'm not being communicated to properly. It's about the problems of communication. And in the film, it plays a little bit more for laughs of, oh, how weird it is. What about this strange culture? And it's like the answer is the culture's not strange. You are the alien in a, you are the stranger in a place that is normal for everyone else. I think
I'm my very limited experience, and yes, I'm a white person, but I'm an Englishman who grew up in Egypt, Argentina, India, and France, all before I was 16.
The term is colonialist.
Sure. And I think they never play, like whenever Bob or Charlotte or John are making those expectations of the culture, they're never being seen in like, the film is not lauding them. Yes, you're in their perspective, but it is not holding up their perspective as the right perspective. I think the problem that we get is the only exposure to Japanese culture we get are caricatures of Japanese culture in the film. I think it would have been different if we actually had more moments like the one that we just read out, with Charlotte actually going and trying to access something that is of Japanese culture and not being able to access it. And that's perhaps the limitation of Sofia's point of view as a 29-year-old.
So but you're saying that the
hotel.
You're saying that the only women with significant or the first woman, I think there's one other woman with a significant speaking role, who is introduced, happens to be an escort, and then a lot of the other things that we see are, and actually there's also like, there's an offhand I wish I could search the script, I'm really sorry. But like the geisha comment, like with the geisha makeup and the girl spanking each other with the thing, like those are the depictions, and those are stereotypical depictions, and we're not being told that's Bob or that's whatever. That's the depiction that we, the reader, get of Japan, and that's the problem. And I know that she lived there before she wrote this script, and so part of this could be from her understanding of, or this is what she witnessed, but that there's the very fact that she did live there means that there's more that she could have put within the script, or more that she could have done to say, this is my initial interpretation, this is what Charlotte would have felt. But exactly what you said, I think one of the solutions is going and experiencing, meeting people who are outside of those broader caricatures of, the translator and the escort and whomever. And the script never does that.
Yeah, the Bechdel test is interesting. I rewatched Aliens. I'm going through the Alien. I'm actually watching all 6 films, and it's like, even if there's a great scene early on that makes Aliens pass, but it's like, get away from her, bitch. Technically passes the Bechdel test, right? About Newt to the female alien, like as much as we're gendering an alien, and it's very interesting. It comes from this script comes from a very masculine.
Are you counting Mother?
Aliens. I'm talking about Aliens.
Oh, Aliens. Right.
Not does the Marine, the female Marine ever talk
to... Actually, okay. They actually talk about Ripley, Spackmeyer, and what's a Van, I can't never say Van Sanchez.
Vasquez
and Spackmeyer talk about Ripley. So that happens in like 20 minutes. But I just like the line, because it's interesting that you say that there is a very kind of bubbly description, and this is the problem. But anyway, that's well outside of the screenwriting thing. But I think we kind of need to.
I think we should. Move on.
Do we? It feels like we've covered the glory bits of writing that we can take from Lost in Translation. There's no doubt that if this was a directing podcast, that we would have a lot more to say about Lost in Translation, and we don't want that sentiment to get lost in translation. But shall we move on to the Bling Ring, which was your favorite of the 3 films selected, Mel?
I would definitely say the Bling Ring is my favorite of the films, both in terms of honestly, probably in terms of the film itself, as well as the script. I actually enjoyed this script the most out of all of them as well. So let me find I've got the summary. The Bling Ring. Inspired by actual events, a group of fame-obsessed teenagers use the internet to track celebrities' whereabouts in order to rob their homes.
It's a
So,
pretty, I mean,
getting to the point.
yeah. And the film is not much more than that.
No, it's really not.
Well, I'm going to let you jump in first, Mel, because I'm going to be less gushing over this than you are, I believe.
Over the script or over the content or over...
Well, I read the script first, which I think actually prejudiced me in a bad way against enjoying the film.
So I'd seen this film in theaters when it very first came out.
Mm-hmm.
And I had liked it quite a bit then. It's interesting for me because I like the film, and I think I know I said this in our pre-talk, but I don't think that this was recording when I was doing it. I like the film. I think it's saying X, but I can understand why a lot of people would argue, say, why? Like some films, I'm like, I don't see how you're taking that interpretation from this. It's quite clear because of X, Y, and Z directing choices that the director's trying to say this, and if you're taking this, you're not paying attention. You the every argument ever about what's the David about Fight Club and about whatever. But for Bling Ring, I was like, wow, I think it's saying this, but it could be saying that, and I get where it's saying it. And then we started talking about doing this podcast. I was like, great, I'll get to revisit it and I'll get to read the script. Maybe that will clear things up for me. It did not. I read the script and I'm just as conflicted about what I think it's trying to do. And there's the axiom about there's no way to shoot a war movie that condemns war without glorifying and romanticizing war. That is how I feel about the Bling Ring. There's no way to shoot this excess consumerism and celebrity and talking about how it can actually be vapid and corrupt and used in the wrong way and whatever without glorifying and romanticizing it, which the film does in some ways. But I also think that the film actually is saying, and I think there's a couple of things that I did mark as we go through, that the screenplay is actually, there are a couple of action lines where I think the screenplay is actually directly comparing the Bling Ring to these celebrities and people who have excess consumerism to teenagers who are doing fucking nothing useful with their lives, and people who are stealing and people who are just whatever. So I did find it really interesting, which is, again, is not to say I didn't like Lost in Translation, and actually I like the Beguiled quite a bit. But for example, when I look at the Beguiled, one of the it's the cinematography, man. It's the performances. It's beautiful. But I don't actually think the screenplay is better than the Bling Ring. I think it's a more beautiful and more enjoyable movie. It's a more beautiful or more enjoyable script. And so that's, I think, where I'm sort of drawing the distinction. Like, anyway, but okay. So Bling Ring, I'm just probably going to go through my notes a little bit chronologically, if you will. The first sort of hint that you get is the fact that on page 4, scene 2, she uses the term Panicross Calabasas McMansions. So it's already a little bit snide, right? Like McMansions, like that's usually a derisive term. And that's sort of the first hint that we get that actually as a writer, she is being slightly sardonic at best towards the depiction of these super rich people. And
I think the font, the title font caught my eye when I was watching it last night. Was it Comic Sans? I don't know. It was very
teenage handwritery, whatever.
Yeah. So yeah, pan across Calabasas McMansions. So I mean, just as a broad observation, this script, like Lost in Translation, like this movie is an experience as a movie, right? And none of that tone, very little of it, is on the page in terms of how the audience is to experience it. So again, it's a very dryly written screenplay. And Lost in Translation, we've highlighted all the brilliant character writing, but for the most part, it is almost written like an action movie in that it's just like exactly.
Let's not insult action movies like that.
In terms of, it is very, very just, visual action, like it's not full of experience or tone or how you want the audience to perceive how what Sofia is not doing is trying to make the reader experience the film that she intends to make with the screenplays that she is writing. Or, I mean, maybe she is trying to do that, but she is not achieving it, in my view.
I don't think she is, because I think she intends to do that as a director.
I've got there's only one call out in the whole of the Bling Ring where she's written in the action lines the feeling that the audience gets, not the characters. And it's at a dressing table, Rebecca sprays herself with Lindsay's perfume. Slight slow motion as she sprays her neck while looking at herself in the mirror lit by the vanity table lights. So far, purely descriptive. Then there's a fetishistic feeling about the way she sprays the perfume and watches herself in the mirror. Fetishistic feeling is the closest she gets to tone and audience experience of this screenplay in the whole script. Everything else where I've highlighted writing flourishes is, again, all about the character interactions. But there are amazing moments that we can probably, I'm sure you've got some that you want to highlight, Mel, where they are such intense experiences when I was watching the film, and none of that was on the page at all as to the intensity of it.
There's one note on page 32 at the very bottom, scene 45, which I found interesting because it says Mark's feeling good, listening to music, putting outfits together in his room, American Gigolo style, laying out combinations on his bed. And this is both tone a little bit and like it's actually shot like Richard Gere in American Gigolo. Like it's literally him like, prancing around a little bit, laying the tie on top of it. It's obviously not quite as fancy. And Mark is no Richard Gere, but who is really? I did think that was really interesting because she's trying to evoke in the reader what this scene will feel like, but also the idea of like really lush, things that if anyone has seen American Gigolo, and I think she's counting on the fact that if her target audience for the readers is mostly Hollywood people, most of them will know it.
For sure, but you're talking about 3 words.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm not using it to discount your point. I'm saying I find that really interesting, like with the Brad Pitt thing, that she does every once in a while drop a pop culture reference in to try to give a vibe to the. And
I would love to actually play the scene because the scene is so much poppier and vibrant than how she's described it here. Like in spec screenplays or other screenplays, it'd be like, Mark's on top of the world. He's never felt better than this before. Like he's come to life. This is a shooting script note to me. As a director, when I'm going through the script and I'm reading, I might go, watch scene from American Gigolo and note how this looked. And that's my jumping off point. Yes, maybe I make it bigger and brighter, but this is very much a shooting script-ish note. Yeah. So it's remarkable, right? Because so much of Sofia's films use literary techniques as opposed to dramatic techniques. So going back to an idea that we were introduced to in our TV pilots episode by Grant Niebel is the idea that there are filmmaking techniques that are literary, i.e. for the audience that the characters are unaware of, like music being the obvious example, versus all the dramatic techniques, which are the drama, what the characters are aware of, right? Action,
Dialogue, behavior, gestures, all that stuff it's almost like literary is the opposite of dramatic.
Yeah.
It's interesting you start with literary. No, but it is. It's like there are a whole bunch of things that the characters are aware of, right? And they drive character motivation. So there's pure drama is that almost like you don't even have music. And we've probably been to plays which don't have music, that are purely about what people say to each other and how they motivate each other. And then I'm iterating this point because it's really interesting. Literary techniques is symbolism, angles, and you can create some interesting tonal contradictions between shows where it's like we are portraying things like dramatic irony is a literary technique, right? Because we are aware of something that the characters aren't, right? And when you go down to satire and stuff like that, that is where, and if Bling Ring sits in satire, it has to sit in the world of literary technique.
Mm-hmm. And the film does, but not these screenplays. So that's what I'm talking about. So Sofia...
Dude, it opens with a quote from Khloe Kardashian.
Yeah. Okay.
That's kind of literary.
Yeah,
maybe?
For sure. As it opens and also as it closes as well. Like most of the commentary of the film is actually in the thread of the intercutting. So a lot of the dramatic tension she does is she's intercutting the post-arrest fallout with the escalating robberies that they're doing. But most of the film is
hustling technique.
Yeah. Most of the film is reveling in the growing I mean, it is fetishistic. Like, it is a perfect word for it. And that's what you're talking about in terms of war movies, Mel. It's impossible to do a film about young people who idolize materialism and consumerism without engaging with it. Otherwise, you won't understand them. I mean, it would be a drab, dreary film if it was like judging these kids, and that you can't find satire in that judgment. I mean, I've always thought that Baz Luhrmann was actually the worst director of The Great Gatsby because he loves everything that Scott Fitzgerald was criticizing about Gatsby. Like, he was fetishizing all the things that Fitzgerald was like, this is why Gatsby is a tragedy.
You mean like, is that like Zack Snyder's?
Come on. Yeah.
Is that like Zack Snyder's interpretation of The Watchmen?
You just plug Watchmen episode here.
Yeah. It's amazing. We've got this amazing, all three of us. How did I?
Perfect.
But while
the criminally underseen Watchmen episode.
I mean, Mel, I'll let you get back to your notes in a second, but you happen to have brought up a page where I had highlighted something. And again, one of the things, a lot of this script is because so much of the film is about these moments and these feelings. It's about them all taking selfies. It's about the music. It's about them looking at each other. It's about them trying on the clothes, right? It's about action that Sofia only spends, a line or two describing. So the script reads very dry. And a lot of the dialogue is deliberately empty and meaningless because it is trying to satirize and highlight how empty and meaningless all this pursuit is. But as a result, what she's used as a technique, one of the few things that I've pulled out of this screenplay that I would be tempted to use in future scripts, is the first line into a scene. She's often actually describing what the characters are about to do. And in that way, it almost feels like cheating, right? But Rebecca and Mark hang out in front of school while Chloe brags about how hardcore she is. Man, I was off the charts. It was crazy. They didn't know how I was driving, let alone still alive.
Wait. So it's telling us and then showing us.
Yeah. Right. And she does this repeatedly throughout the script. And I think it's quite important, particularly to this story, because the dialogue is kind of meant to sort of wash and meld together. It's deliberately vacuous, but what they want to do, what she is doing here, it's almost like Greek chorus style, like a Greek chorus in old theater. They stand up and you are about to watch a scene wherein blah, 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 and da, do this. Right. And she's orienting you as a reader before you're getting into it. And often we are jumping into scenes where it is vibrant and chaotic, and that does happen a lot. I mean, she's talking about the recovery from a car crash, which just happened on the previous page, and we can, when we edit the video together, we can play it. But Chloe's driving wasted with Rebecca and Mark in the car. They're blasting music high from their night. Suddenly, Chloe crashes into another car. Airbags go off in their faces with that awful sound of a car crash. Like, it's so matter of fact, so dry. Whereas when you're watching the screenplay, this is huge, momentous experience?
I think it's interesting because my next note is actually it's on page 36, and it actually underlines what you've just said. Because I've got two scenes back to back, right? The first is that one of my favorite shots from the film, because like I said, like The Beguiled and Lost in Translation are both, to my mind, better films, but this shot is fucking stunning. It's as stunning as anything. It's that one wide shot on the hill that's just an incredibly slow zoom in, and it's completely silent. You just see this house that's all lit up from the inside, and you see them running through, and you see them going through the rooms, and you see them collecting things, you see them coming out. It's just 3 lines in a wide shot. We see Rebecca and Mark as small figures enter a glass house on a hill. They run around and leave with bags of stuff. That feels really dry, right? Whereas on screen, it's stunning, it's gorgeous. Let's get to the next scene though, 55. This is a scene where it's just like 3 kids, trying clothes on. This scene, as written though, is actually telling us something interesting about the characters. Posing in their looks. Nikki puts on some crazy Louboutin. Nikki and Sam dance. Mark goofs around, acting like a big shot pimp, flanked by his girls. Like, she's giving us, this is comedy, right? She's giving us the little moments. She's writing those out so much in more detail and more like tongue-in-cheek and more like, isn't this ridiculous? I almost feel like this scene is like wink nodding to me, the reader, as being like, as teenagers, this is how this makes you feel. It's a little bit stupid, but we've all been there. Oh, hello.
Yeah, I'm being assaulted by my cat.
Assaulted.
So it's interesting to me, the juxtaposition of the writing in those 2 scenes. Like, the thing that's going to end up being purely beautiful and visual, she's just sort of like, here's a couple lines, whatever. You wouldn't know it by reading it. But the thing that's meant to evoke, that's stuff that she is writing out and concentrating on in these scripts. Because again, that's the thing that the actors are going to want, right? That's the thing that the reader is going to want. The reader isn't going to want 12 paragraphs describing how this camera is really slowly coming in over the hill. That's a visual thing. And she knows she'll get to direct that later. And it's not impressive to write that out.
It's evoking the emotion that you'll find the cinematic translation of.
Yeah. I think, I know that you were looking for more evidence of satire, and I do actually think it's in the script more than it's perhaps in the film in terms of deliberate. She's actually put one character performance note, once again, when she's going above and beyond in the text. It's often around character motivations rather than audience feeling, but she's put one in brackets which caught my eye, and it's, Sam, does my butt look good in these jeans? Nikki, your butt looks awesome, underlined. Then in the action line, in brackets, she says this with the importance of giving a really serious compliment. And they are highlighting the vacuousness of these people.
I just think there's absolutely no way to satirize anything more than those Paris Hilton pillows and the Paris Hilton photos. I don't understand how the heck she possibly talked Paris Hilton into letting her shoot in her house. But that's incredible. And I was really interested to see that a lot of that was not in the script, actually. And I don't know if it's just because she didn't know if she could get the house, or if it's that the set dresser came up with that, or if that she just walked into Paris Hilton's house, to write something this good, but here we go. Like, I don't know, but yeah, I think that I love that line. Actually, that's really great. With a really serious compliment, and actually to Emma Watson, I think this is actually one of her best performances. And I think Emma Watson is an actress who is incredibly influenced by their director, as opposed to an actor who's very like self-driven and not driven in a like, you know what I mean. I think guided in terms of performance. And I actually think this is a great performance, and plays as you are reading that, I can hear how she would say that
Yep.
that line. It's absolutely there.
Yeah.
Really serious.
Hmm?
She does tell us a little bit about the evolution of the characters' emotions, a little bit in terms of on page 52, scene 79, in the bright light, Mark, Rebecca, Sam, Chloe, and Nikki strut down the street with big sunglasses, lattes, and shopping bags, just like reality stars. This is a type. They have a more jaded attitude now. So I think there's
That's
a little
the
bit of
satire, isn't it? That's the kind of language that we use.
Yeah.
We have that jaded more.
Isn't this the poster shot as well?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Poster shot, and was featured in at least one of the trailers for sure, of them walking down. I've got just a few more sort of.
I mean, I guess I'm one of those people on the right side, or the side of the fence that enjoys the film more, where I'm like, this is so clearly a satire. I don't understand anyone who thinks it isn't a satire. But like you said, it does. She has an eye for fashion. She's part of that world. There is an enjoyment of it, but who doesn't? I mean, all three of us, who in this podcast has practiced their imaginary Oscar speech?
It's not imaginary, motherfucker.
It's just rehearsing. Oh, see, I've got the. It's just I haven't.
That's
self-defeatist. Blank details later.
Self-defeatist attitude there, Chaz.
No, I'm saying that we all have this confidence and this attraction to the spectacle, and we engage with this.
And you just made me want to do a Drive Zero on Starship Troopers, which is one of my favorite films of all time. And there is enough people that I've seen it with that are like, how is this a satire? And you're like, how is it not a satire?
I mean, I rewatched RoboCop recently, and let's not get sucked into a Verhoeven podcast while we're doing a Sofia Coppola podcast, but
I'm up for it.
I've actually I got to keep this moving along because I'm not gonna last a little longer. I am curious. So on she does this a few times, but in particular, page 74, scene 117, at the very bottom, Mark, parentheses, sad and betrayed. I thought she was just visiting her dad. I think it's interesting that sometimes, and I didn't see a pattern as I was reading all of these scripts. Sometimes she gives you an action line where she says, Mark is sad and betrayed, and then the next thing is the dialogue. And sometimes she does this in Lost in Translation, actually, probably quite a bit more, maybe because it was her first film, who knows, where she parenthesizes how the character is feeling or how the character says a line. It's almost like a line reading. Personally, I prefer it to be in an action line for the most part. But I think I find a pattern. I don't know if you know of a pattern, whether if looking then later, same exact sort of scene, right? So scene 78, page 78, scene 122, we're in an interrogation room, it's telling us what a character is feeling, etc. But Rebecca's eyes light up. That's an action line. So not Rebecca excited, anticipatory, really, what did Lindsay say? But in the action line instead. So that's more just a note of curiosity. Like I didn't really see a pattern or why she did one versus the other, but it's two different techniques or ways of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And then again, a little bit in terms of when she writes dialogue, she doesn't use a lot of action lines to break up dialogue. So if you look at scene 127, which starts on 80 and goes for like 80, 81, 82, 83. There's one action line on 83. Then we're into 84. One more action line. It's like a 4-page thing. And she doesn't tell us anything about the characters she's doing. She lets their dialogue speak for itself. And she's just like, here it is. And is that because she's going to direct? Is that because she wanted the actors to read it and give their own take? Is it because it's so clearly a satire that, like, what are you going to what are you going to keep saying? This character is really serious about what they're saying, because there's no arc to these characters, right? There's no arc. They start the thing, things happen, their circumstances change, the movie ends. So I do think it's interesting that she's got all of these pages without really hardly any action other than Nikki is getting emotional. Yeah, okay.
So let's contrast that scene with, it's a long scene for Nikki's character that is really just highlighting, again, her emptiness and the lack of journey, like you're saying. But this film, in comparison to Lost in Translation, and certainly in comparison to The Beguiled, it is very deliberately drawing on quote unquote MTV. And I know that's a dated reference, but that's really what this feels like quick flash cuts, very cheeky, prominent titles. Like, it feels very deliberately drawing on kind of pop culture and postmodernism, and where she's actually written that into the script on this scene, 91A, she's so matter of fact. So she obviously delights in characters and their engagement, but this film is like an epic visual and oral experience. But here in this montage, it's close up, Rebecca snorting a line of coke, music kicks in, stealing, snorting, shopping montage. The editing pace gets faster and faster, almost on a loop of stealing, snorting coke in a dressing room while shopping at Kitson, stealing, snorting, shopping, Starbucks, dancing at a valley party. The kids' photos are mixed in. And it's funny to read, and you definitely get the vibe, but it's certainly nowhere near. She's almost like dismissive of what will be the more powerful experience in the actual end movie, in contrast to that 4-page scene that you've just talked through with only one action line in it. Anyway, should we round off our Sofia Coppola exploration with The Beguiled?
I just have one more note on the script real quick, which is that, interestingly, like Lost in Translation, the script ending is different than the movie ending.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the ending here focuses on Mark and the prison bus and Lohan's time in jail. And it does have Nikki's fame grab in the 2011 version. She took it out, because I'm reading the 2012 version, and then put it back in. But also there's all this added stuff of Mark on the prison bus and talking about some other things. So I just think it's interesting that clearly, like, the end is something that she really maybe works through and does different things while she's shooting. And she had the idea for it here, just like the idea for Lost in Translation is similar, but she actually really reworks that a bit. So I just found it interesting. But yeah, that was actually my last thing on the Bling Ring. So let's move to The Beguiled.
Do you want to bring up the script, Chaz? Is that what you're looking for?
I've got it here. I thought this 2012 version ends exactly the same way. Where it ends with the E! Entertainment News interview with Nikki.
That's the 2000. Maybe I was.
This is the 2012 version.
Is it? I just had the 2012 version up, but it was annotated. That's weird. Either that or I wrote the wrong number in my notes. All right. One of them is, it ends differently with the prison bus thing, but the E thing is added. I just might have had which script it was added to backwards. Stu can make me sound smarter in post, right?
Not you. Sorry, Mel.
Oh, just himself. Right. Of course. All right.
So
I don't need to do any work on me, actually.
That's just because you're not talking. You're letting us do all the work on this one.
Yeah.
Give them enough rope.
He's playing the Biden policy, which is I will end up looking good by not saying anything at all.
Until he puts out an ad of himself driving a Corvette. Excellent choice.
Corvettes are fucking amazing. Who doesn't want a Corvette?
All of the rich people who are dying right now.
Stu, moderate Democratic voter. We should all get Corvettes.
A chicken in every pot, a Corvette in every driveway.
A Corvette is a working class person's sports car.
All right, so The Beguiled. Please cut every notice of politics out of this podcast. Oh my God, I so cannot wait till politics is over for the year.
Is politics
the
over?
The election is over. Till the election is over, I should say. Politics is never over. All right. The Beguiled. The unexpected arrival of a wounded Union soldier at a girls' school in Virginia during the American Civil War leads to jealousy and betrayal. I've got to say, that could at least do with a comma.
But again, she's attracted to stories where the plot is so slight because
Absolutely.
she dwells in the character interactions and the drama.
Yep. And apparently she even cut quite a bit of, I've not read the original book, but apparently she cut quite a bit of the plot from that as well, just because it is about the interpersonal connections and rivalries and feelings and jealousies and all of that sort of thing.
So women stuff.
Yes, men don't have any of those feelings.
Yeah, anyone who's listened to this podcast knows that Stu and I don't have any petty rivalries or egos.
There's no rivalry here, Chaz.
Cool. Take it away.
So this was the film that look, it's very different to everything else that Sofia has made. I think partially because it's a period film and feels very period-y, like very sort of Henry James merchant.
Yeah, because Marie Antoinette was present day.
Okay, Marie Antoinette. That's a perfect. But that's also a perfect contrast because she made Marie Antoinette as a very sort of like idiosyncratic pop version of a period film, whereas this feels very Merchant Ivory-ish. That said, she does do a lot of what we've identified in Lost in Translation and in The Bling Ring, where again she's writing very dry, and when she does go beyond the dryness, it's nearly always limited to character performances and character desires. But the one thing that I do want to highlight in this script, as well as the character beats, is her use of white space for decompression. So if you're ever looking to, so Stu and I, we've done a previous podcast on white space, mainly looking at it in terms of action. Like usually you go, you want to reduce the number of words and sentences and have, increase the read, like the speed of the read, to increase what the experience of pace will be in the film. She uses the exact same technique, but to slow the film down.
That's actually what decompression means, Chaz.
Yes.
Decompression from comics is about actually how do you translate slow motion to comics. So you decompress it rather than uncompress it. So you have multiple panels that have the same moment, right? So besides me just showing you up, there's no rivalry here. There's no politics.
No feelings. Those are
no feelings. They're women's stuff.
Those belong to the women.
It is but it's important because decompression, uncompression, the control and mastery of white space is about how you control the audience's experience of time relative to time, because cinema is sound and picture over time. But it's your experience of that. So decompression is specifically slowing stuff down on, like, it's that weird experience. So what you're going to, I think, to highlight or condense that episode is that interesting experience with a lot of white space where it's a moment broken down into individual shots. That's a moment that is like a 10-second moment that we make feel longer, but the read is accelerated because we're using very short sentences broken up with a lot of white space. So the read feels accelerated, but it's a moment that's actually a slow motion moment. So it creates this really interesting ironies, like a word, tension between this is a moment that is heightened emotionally, but it is broken down into its constituent parts.
Yeah. Well, this film has a lot of moments where...
Like March. That was March. March 2020.
Yeah. Well, for us in Melbourne, like from March till present day. That time has been decompressed. But to my point is, when I want to accelerate the read on the page, I want the reader's experience of pace to increase. So as they're reading faster, it feels like what they're watching in their mind is going faster. Whereas Sofia uses that same technique to actually slow it down. So I'll bring up an example just so that people can know what the hell I'm talking about. So there's many moments in The Beguiled where there's lots of drama and really beautiful, tense scenes, but in between those scenes, there's lots of gardening and food preparation and like listening to music, and that's very deliberate, right? And she uses the white space to represent how long that is actually going to take, but she doesn't spend a whole lot of time describing how the audience is feeling in that. She uses white space instead to decompress it. So here we've got close shot. Edwina's hands dip a cloth into a bowl of water. She wrings it out. Water drips. Close shot. Edwina's hands wipe the cloth over McBurney's forehead. A slight moan from McBurney, still unconscious. Close on her hands and cloth wiping soot off his face. Water drips down his face, onto his scruffy beard, down his smooth chest. She carefully wipes his chest. Miss Martha finishes up her work. Edwina, on the verge of fainting, steadies herself with the back of a chair. I mean, part of this, that one of the things I actually do like about the script is it reads like an erotica novel.
I was going to say, he's got a pretty...
It watches like one as well.
Ooh, that chest. Ooh.
Well, it's Colin Farrell as well, so yes.
Babe. Total babe. Ooh. Ooh.
He went out and got a tan for this movie, I gotta say.
Well, he's Irish, so, you know.
So it's fake tan. All right.
So, I mean, there's lots of, again, she does have these amazing cheats in the big print. She's got the most egregious cheat that I've ever seen in any script ever. Like, this is like the kind of thing that people would
including
call out.
Yours.
Yeah, the kind of thing that people would call out on podcasts as being terrible cheating, and I think Hawley did. So
we're calling this out on our podcast.
No, because I think she pulls it off. So McBurney is passed out as Miss Martha sits next to him with a bucket of water and pieces of cloth. Having volunteered before as a nurse, she keeps a professional posture, but it is clear she hasn't seen a man's body in a long time. There is a whole lot of backstory in there that no reader, no viewer of the end film is ever going to know.
That's the actor note. Like Nicole Kidman's
Exactly.
not going, oh, okay.
She is writing for an audience of one, Nicole Kidman.
Yep.
So basically, she's trying to be professional, but she's getting fucking horny, right?
Yeah. I mean, all of
Have
this
we
film,
not all been there?
I don't try to act professional.
this whole film is about the introduction of a man into this household creates this bubbling sexual tension among everyone across 3 generations of women. So there's Miss Martha, who's the Nicole Kidman character, who runs this school for girls in the now isolated Deep South from the Civil War. There's Miss Edwina, who's played by Kirsten Dunst, who's like the more progressive, educated woman who's come in as a teacher. And then there's the schoolgirls. And everyone in this house is vying for McBurney's attentions.
As are we on this podcast.
Oh, yes.
Mel's like, no comment.
But it's interesting, again, to see, again, where she chooses to step out from her very dry writing style. Here on page 27, there's just a dialogue scene between Miss Martha and McBurney, and you can see there's a whole page of dialogue here interrupted by the single line of action, which is, there is something lovable about him. Who's that to? It's a great line. It's just reminding the reader, oh, even though they're talking in this very period way, we're just telling you this is finally her actually reaching out to the audience. This is how you are going to feel about this guy when I am directing this scene.
She's got another one of those on
What's the line?
29.
There is something lovable about him. Look at your screen, Stuart.
Yeah, I know. There's our podcast audience won't be able to look at your screen, Jazz.
I read it out. There is something lovable about him.
On page 29, which is in scene, wow, this is at the end of a long scene.
I wonder if you and I highlighted the same line.
He smiles at her happily like a schoolboy. Miss Martha leaves. McBurney lies back on his bed, marveling at his fortune to find himself in such a prison. In the film, Colin he actually laughs a little bit to himself to try to get that across, which it doesn't say there, but that's clearly an acting choice, right? So he laughs to himself. That's getting across to us, the audience, what she's trying to inspire in the reader. That, you know, she's got that schoolboy, he's endearing, but also I think what you said is really interesting. The style of writing, marveling at his fortune to find himself in such a prison, that's not a style that she would have used to write the line in a Bling Ring.
Yeah.
That is clearly a stylistic choice, which is evocative of the sort of speech patterns and writing patterns of the day that she's set to film in, which I find quite interesting.
Possibly taken from the novel.
Possibly.
Yeah. That said, in the second half of the script, when the tensions are rising, she uses a technique that we haven't seen in the other scripts, but Stuart and I are using in our script right now, where in italics, she's writing exactly what the characters are thinking. And in what I find fascinating is in those italics, she's writing with present day language, not period language.
Yes.
So I'm
Page
gonna
40. Do you always have to be such a slut?
Yes,
That's
that
in
is
the
one of the
italics.
ones. That is one of the ones that I've highlighted. So there's
Very modern.
I think there's 3 of those where Edwina gives Alicia a sharp look. Do you always have to be such a slut? Sorry, that's one of the decompressed moments. Alicia passes by and gives Edwina a snotty look, like I'm the one he wants.
To be fair, the first recorded use of slut is circa 1400.
Okay,
I'm not saying that it wasn't regularly used, but even the way that it's like, oh, you always have to be such a slut. Like, it's the whole line.
Yeah, and she uses like, and it's not as in a metaphor, like it's sounding like it's part of the dialogue. And I can just imagine it going like, he gives her a hateful look. Like, how can you even speak to me? Is how it sounds in my head when I'm reading these lines. He looks at her like, what the fuck do you want?
Sorry, this is such a divergence, but this is what you mean by modern. So apparently, etymologically, slut used to mean untidy. So this is from 1664. My wife called up the people to washing by 4:00 in the morning, and our little girl Susan is the most admirable slut and pleases mightily. So it's obviously completely changed meaning.
Yeah.
So I take that back about it's been in use for like 4 centuries. It's like its meaning has significantly changed.
But I think it's testament to Sofia's writing here that she's gone through half a script of very period dialogue and very period action lines, and then these decompressed moments on the page that are beautiful and evocative. And then when the drama is ramping up, she turns them all into like teenage girls, which most of them are. But it's like it's almost straight out of the Bling Ring, like these lines that they're saying in their minds that only the reader and the actors can get. I actually, because my viewing of this film was so ruined by my father, I actually enjoyed reading this script a lot more than my watching of it. And she's got jokes in all 3 of these films. In all 3 of these scripts, there are punchlines that work in the film. They're not just for the reader, but how she writes the cut or a reveal is a joke.
The cut in particular. I also find it really quite interesting in this script that everything cut to, fade out. Like she's got, I think there's only 2 fade outs in the whole thing. I noted one on page 78. I think there's one a little bit later, but it's really interesting when she chooses to fade as opposed to choosing to cut. And that's clearly she's doing that both potentially to herself as a writer, but even as a reader. If you've been reading a lot of scripts, you're moving on quickly versus like, oh, this is slowly transitioning me into the next scene and they're over, it's it's different. And I think that's really intentional. That's not just I don't know what to put here. Here's your random transition. It's very intentional what she's using as transitions and what she's using as wide and close up. There's the bit with the key on 74, close up shot of the key, and then cut to big wide shot the next thing. Like she's really intentionally going from a close up to a massive shot, and she wants the reader to know that's what's happening. Because you've got this guy who's trapped, who's in a small space, the key turns in the lock, then you're out on the wide, this is where the women are, this is, much more open. There's still dangers, it's still interesting and different, but she's putting that feeling, that juxtaposition in the script using shot size.
Yeah. I mean, her writing style in terms of format and describing shots feels very 80s, early 90s. So I don't know if that's as much a part of her lived experience and life education. It doesn't feel like the writing style of spec scripts and blacklist scripts that are coming out today, but she doesn't have to write to those, right?
Yeah. Well, no, she's who she is. I mean, even if she wasn't, by the time she's writing The Beguiled, she would have earned the right to write however it was she wanted to write, essentially. Yeah.
So is that, I mean, either of you two have any more things you'd like to highlight from The Beguiled before we wrap up?
Let me check.
Oh, I mean, I think it is an interesting development that she feels more comfortable writing in that kind of shot language. Is it because we've found more of a shooting script, or has she found that the most economical? I mean, that's a question mark. I mean,
but I feel even Lost in Translation was shot list style. It almost reads like the Die Hard script,
Yeah.
Not that that's a bad thing. It's just of its time in terms of style and formatting.
Okay.
I don't know. That is my experience of reading the script. And I do wonder whether, she learned screenwriting at a time when shot lists were expected from all screenwriters. Yes. And it became unfashionable to write in shots.
I think, I guess the observation from The Beguiled, I want to come back to it because we talked about her not communicating tone, but The Beguiled has chosen to use a vernacular. Its choice of language communicates the period setting, or seems to. And maybe she's chosen to take those lines of description from the book, but there's still a choice to do that.
Oh, right? For sure.
So you can communicate tone, and that Bling Ring kind of pop culture references alludes to the tone. Look, this actually feels like me transitioning into our wrap-up thing conveniently. But, it alludes to kind of a tone, whereas the dryness of Lost in Translation, I don't know, like maybe it's because it's only her second script, but also because maybe it speaks to the alienation of the characters, right? Like they're characters that are alienated from their own emotions, that having waxing lyrical, they're certainly not characters that were into waxing lyrical about their emotional feelings. And that's part of the reason they're so disconnected from the world and those people around them, is that they're emotionally disconnected. So writing in an emotional way feels inconsistent with character. So maybe that's the lesson.
Potentially. I feel like, having gone through all three of these scripts, she loves writing character and seems to have zero time for using words to express tone of any of these three films. None of these three scripts conveyed the tone of watching the films for me in the way that other scripts do. And I feel that the pressure is on certainly us in where we are in our careers, and on other spec writers where there's much more pressure on us to convey tone in a way that she's just gone, no, I'm bringing that. Everyone knows that I am bringing that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Yeah, you get so much. I think if I were an actor, I would absolutely froth over getting these scripts. As a director, I'd enjoy it as a director as well, because there's so much to read into it. But like tonally, you could take it you could give that to 3 different directors and get wildly different films. Whereas some scripts you read it and go, yeah, okay, I see where you're going with that. Now I need to, this is definitely, these scripts are definitely tailored towards really specific, really audiences.
All right. So what are the kind of key lessons? Should we do like our key learnings from wrap-ups?
Sure.
3 years in the making. No pressure, guys. No pressure.
I mean,
3 weeks.
If anyone wants to read what great unfilmables for character performances are, read Sofia Coppola scripts. Hands down, incredible. But the things that I'm actually going to take from this that I might use judiciously is how she sets up a scene, like Greek chorus style, like that line about what we're about to dramatize. You only need it in certain circumstances. You shouldn't use it in every film and in every scene. But I think I found it really helpful and orienting in a strange kind of way. And then I might.
There's nothing strange about it. We've all had scenes that we've written, and then it's like we need to orientate the audience and the actors, and that does that. Yeah. It helps us understand what we're about to watch. She is trying to do this thing. Let's watch her do this thing.
Yeah. And previously, when I've wanted a moment to linger and to slow a film down, I've actually written more action lines, like 4 or 5-line paragraphs. I wanted to slow the read down to be similar to how the pace of the film or the viewing experience would slow down. But Sofia has taught me that you can use the exact same technique for speeding up the pace of the read for slowing it down. So those are look, this feels like an incredibly reductionist take from such an incredible artist over an attempt at a view of her entire career. But to me, it's fascinating. Her writing, she does what everyone should aspire to, where she writes down the drama so incredibly well. But that's not what we can take as screenwriting lessons from it. Like, she seems to instinctively know.
What? What? How can we not take that as screenwriting lessons?
I don't know how I could read these scripts, and I couldn't read Lost in Translation and go, I know now how to go and write Lost in Translation.
Okay.
That's an interesting one. Yeah.
Because she knows that if I write these scenes and I know how to direct them in the way to make them great. And I don't think those are the lessons that I can, for screenwriters, take from this. Again, maybe if we do a take 0 where we do a directorial retrospective on Sofia Coppola, we would be able to pull a lot more out of it.
Yeah, she does she lingers. She doesn't cut very much. I mean, there's some scenes that are pretty much just playing a wide shot.
Yeah, I think my main takeaway is really quite similar to like what Chaz was saying at the beginning, writing how you're writing emotions for characters, how you're writing unfilmables for actors, how you're writing things that in quite an economic space. These scripts are all quite short, actually, especially considering how much white space it had, but in a very economical way, getting across the emotions of the actors, not the tone of the film at all, but the emotions of the characters and what the actors, giving the actors a foundation from which to work, as well as just the way that she uses cuts to set up jokes. I absolutely love. That's something that I've been working a lot on recently, and the way that she uses like scene ending cuts or scene ending transitions, whether that's cut to or fade to or crowd fade or whatever. Those are my 2 biggest takeaways.
Even the Beguiled has written jokes in there that made me laugh. I'm just gonna I'm gonna bring up one example because I feel like we're doing her a disservice if we don't. But
bring up 2, Chaz. Bring up 2.
Well, I've got lol written in all 3 scripts at different points, and they're nearly all, as Mel says, across edits, right? And I don't know, like, there are moments that make me laugh in the script, and I don't know whether they work as well in the film or not, So the girls surround McBurney. McBurney opens his eyes and looks up at the backlit group of curious, flush-faced girls looking down on him, their hair ranging from sandy blonde to chestnut brown. With a weak smile, is he dreaming? He turns his head a little to see Miss Martha glaring down at him severely.
And it's even a colon. Like, it's real nice, like, makes you pause, but the sentence is in it. Oh, there it is. That's what's happening.
And it made me laugh to read that. Like, I could see the visual joke in this pan and cutting back and forth with his like, oh my God, have I died and gone to heaven? And then like, oh my God.
Good. What's your takeaway, Stu?
That's actually a pretty good one because it makes me interested. Like, that is a more complicated draft zero lesson. So I'm going to end on a question because you want to make
Stuart
the read.
hand grenade.
Yeah, it's the classic Stuart hand grenade. You want the read to be entertaining, right? But you've got to make it work within the tone. And so the script that Chaz and I have been working on, we were writing jokes into the big print that were about making us laugh and being like, yeah, you're writing a horror. You're watching a horror film. We're writing a horror film. So there's one character that's like, she zigzags across a way. This isn't fucking Prometheus. It's like a big print line. And it's an in-joke. And it's like we know what we're watching, but people objected to the readers were like, oh, this film's totally inconsistent. It's like, that's kind of true, but at the same time, we know you're not reading the final document. What is interesting is she's found a way to be entertaining in her writing that doesn't break the tone of the film. And as much as we say she doesn't write the tone, there is like a earnestness. I haven't seen the Bling Ring, so maybe I'm wrong, but even though you guys are talking about it being satire, I don't think it strikes me as it not being earnest.
So that's actually probably a pretty accurate summation.
From the stuff that I've read, I'm like, this is still earnest. It can be satire, but it's still earnest in a way that like Starship Troopers is both earnest and also fucking hilarious. But I think the other thing is that her emphasis, my takeaway is the emphasis on character relationships. And as much as there is these moments with Charlotte in Coming Back to Land, Lost in Translation, about her experience of being alone in Japan, which is about highlighting her however you say that ennui word, Chaz, you can correct me now.
Ennui.
There you go. Ennui. Most of what... Yeah, of course, I butcher English, yet alone other languages. So I do not try to, like, half the words I know how to spell and half the words I know how to pronounce. I just don't know which half it is. You've written with me, you know how true that is, Chaz. There is I've lost my train of thought. Like,
sorry, ennui in Lost in Translation.
Oh, yeah, character relationships. Just making sure that you can ground your character motivation in the relationship to other characters actually makes really compelling reading, and it also makes it really compelling to shoot. Yeah. And what I mean by shoot is not just sticking up cameras. It makes it compelling for actors. It makes it compelling for the director. It makes it compelling for everyone else. Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing, to just keep on thinking about your characters in relationship to other characters.
And as much as I was banging on about quote unquote cheating, it never felt like cheating in the read.
Yeah, it really does work. Hey, yeah, if you know the rules, then you know how to break them. All right.
Thank you, good. Mel, for in 3 weeks reading 3 scripts and watching 3 movies, which was more work than Stu could muster in 3 years.
To be fair, I did not have a root canal this week, so I mean,
don't give him excuses. He would have done exactly the same thing with or without root canal.
I hope you have many of the good drugs.
I had a secret drop off today. It's allowed. Caregiving is allowed under the law, so therefore getting codeine-based painkillers, even if I don't have
be allowed.
Stu definitely needed that intimate visit.
That's not an intimate visit. That's just caregiving, Chaz. Notice I didn't ask you because you do not care.
Because that would have been the intimate visit. This is why. Saving that for next week.
Yeah. Chaz is coming to fuck me over.
All right. Do I need to sign off, or are we just going to end it with that?
Yeah, I think that there will be many options for our opening lines of this podcast, which is usually an indication of a good recording.
Excellent.
Yeah. Wow, you actually good for a little bit of foreplay this time, Chaz. After 19 years, or 10 years in my case.
Oh, that's a scary thought.
All right.
Like you had no comeback, and that's where we're going to end.